We have some presenters right here today from Rare Consulting, who I'll introduce in a second, who will be doing the presentation. I'm really glad that you all came because obviously this is a very important issue for this community in particular. I'm not sure I could come up with a more a better example of a case study than what you have right there. So this is great that you're here so we can get some feedback. It's a conversation, sea level rises, that we've been having for a long time. There have been lots of studies over the last several decades in this county. I think that we start transitioning from just having these discussions to talking about what we should do and then taking action. I think it's just, we're kind of like in this transition phase now of moving from discussions to action. We can't do that overnight. It's not something the county's going to swoop in and say what we're going to do. So we need that feedback from you. So that we can have a team effort amongst communities and county and other agencies about how to handle a situation like Juan Bay Road, for instance, which is such a critical thoroughfare and connection to the rest of the world for this community. I've got my colleague Kendra here, Director of Environmental Stewardship, and I want to introduce Andrea McLennan and Rachel Johnson from Herrera. They are our consultants who have been working on this project with us, and they will be providing the presentation today and leading this discussion. So thank you very much.
And I would say, Councilor Fuller extends her, sorry, she wasn't able to make it today, but she does plan on attending, the next, one. So she just had a schedule conflict.
Thank you, Kendra. Very nice. Rachel, I'll turn over to you and just introduce yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, actually, Andrea, do you want to start? Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Andrea McLennan. I'm a coastal geomorphologist. I've been working in the region for like 25 years, doing work focused on management and restoration in the near shore, and as well as like mapping the shore types, geomorphic shore types, and looking at the rates at which they're changing. Done lots of work with Friends of the San Juans, and was actually here about 10 years ago talking about sea level rise. So I don't know if any of you were here for that, but if I look familiar, that may be why. Anyways, I'm happy to be here again, and stop there. No, I'm talking more later. It's really funny.
Hi, nice to meet you all. My name is Rachel Johnson. I've not been working in the Salish Sea for as long as Andrea, but I'm really glad to be here with you all today. My background is as an engineer. I do a lot of work with stormwater and flooding and understanding coastal, helping communities learn about those changes and start to plan and adapt to those. So really glad to be with you all today. It's always my favorite place to go bike camping, so it feels really great to be back here for work. Yeah, and we've got a couple folks I think joining online as well. How many do we have?
We're up to 8 or 9.
Okay, so if you hear that noise, that's just people joining virtually. All right, well, we have, this is kind of our agenda for the next 2 hours here. I might just be walking up and down here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges, which I'm sure you all know very well living here. We're going to give just a little bit of a background around sea level rise, and just so we're all kind of starting with the same basis and the same groundwork. We're going to try to have a break around 1, let people get up, stretch, move around, talk for a bit. And then we'll talk more about what do we do? So what are adaptation strategies? Have some time just for discussion. So everyone being able to talk, and then wrap up and talk about next steps as we get ready for the second workshop. That's kind of our plan for today. Good, bonus slide. Just some logistics, you probably all know where the bathrooms are. If you didn't add your name to the sign-in in the back, if you could do that during the break, that'd be great, just so we know who's here. We'll have a break in the middle, and we want this to be informal, so if you've got questions as you go along, please answer those, and we'll have spots throughout as well where you can ask a question. And we do have the recording here just so that we're able to take notes, and the folks online are able to hear. And then, yeah, we're gonna wrap up around 2 o'clock. We've got a 3:30 ferry to catch, so we'll be aiming for that. Okay, and what's our goal for today? We're really just here to share information and to continue the conversation around the challenges we know that we're facing, and what we can do about those. So trying to start the conversation, have some collaboration, and really lay the groundwork for the second workshop. And just, yeah, thank you all for sharing your time as we're discussing. Just wanna, say that this is a place for listening and learning together. So just being respectful of everyone's time and input. We're not gonna, we're not going to use this. This is an interactive tool, so the people online are able to add responses and questions. These are actually ones from a workshop we did the other day in the San Juan, or on San Juan Island. But this is just, we're gonna use the questions as kind of prompts. So maybe before that, who here lives on the coast? Show of hands. Okay. And who here has been to a workshop or conversation before about sea level rise on Shaw and coastal hazards? Maybe, yeah, okay, great. Yeah, and then I'm just curious, what brings you here today? Why did you decide to join us from 12 to 2 today?
Point Bay Road.
Juan Bay Rd, yep.
Indian Cobra,
Indian Cobra?
Smuggler's Cove Road.
Causeway.
Yes, Neck Point Causeway, yeah. Anyone else? Other reasons why you're here today?
Climate preparedness.
Climate preparedness, yep. Okay, well, you're in the right spot. And this is kind of fun, you can see responses from what people on other islands have done also for their reasons. Free apple, yeah. Also does. Okay, those are just some questions. All right, so I'm not gonna belabor this because you all know this better than we do. Lots of challenges, lots of changes with flooding and erosion that we're seeing all across the islands. Flooding during high tides and storms, water going over roads, driftwood going over roads in places, erosion of bluffs and beach areas, both from waves and from stormwater and heavy rains. Beaches narrowing in some places and disappearing in some places. And just, more rain also overwhelming drainage systems and adding to problems with that. And with that, we see a lot of changes to infrastructure, impacts to our infrastructure as well. Do these look familiar? Anyone?
That's a missing road, right?
That's a missing road, yeah. Yeah. Damage to roads. Andrea and I stopped on our drive off the ferry to look at the road and noticed some, cracking in places and areas where there's erosion, which is really concerning. You can have loss of access when you start to see that. Also impacts to septic systems. I don't know if any of you are on septic, Shaw, yes. Right, so concerns with that, with more flooding and with higher water levels. Don't want that in your septic system. Also for wells, saltwater intrusion, as we have seawater being able to get into our drinking water. And then also impacts to buildings, whether that's erosion by a house or erosion under a road or flooding. So lots of changes that we are seeing. And with that, also a lot of ecological impacts, also to our habitats with rising seas and erosion and flooding and shoreline armoring. We'll talk all more about that later, so don't want to belabor that. And then, do you want to just highlight, as you all know, the county's been doing stuff for a while. There was a vulnerability assessment that was wrapped up in 2024. So looked across the whole county, trying to identify areas where there are greater risks for flooding and erosion. And we're going to highlight a couple of those for Shaw later. And then also, previous workshops and surveys. So we're really just trying to build on that. We're talking now because planning ahead really gives us more options and can give us better outcomes. So lets us avoid damage before it happens instead of reacting, looking at different alternatives and imagining different possible futures and kind of looking at the trade-offs for those and choosing which makes sense. And also hopefully reducing costs over time by avoiding emergency fixes and repairs. And then also just you know, we all have a role to play, and we can't do it alone. It's gonna be a mix of individuals and communities and the county kind of working together to try to figure out how do we adjust and adapt to all of these changes. And so some are gonna be collective, like thinking about roads or access, and others might be more personal or more neighborhood or community-wide of looking at how to deal with septic systems or addressing a neighborhood or multiple homes together. And then, yeah, we really want to hear from you today. We're going to use your input to shape the second workshop. And this is really an opportunity for the county to hear from all of you about your concerns, your ideas, for all of that. Okay, so with that, I'm curious, what changes have you noticed? Imagine many of you have lived here for a while. What are some of the changes you've seen with flooding or erosion by your house or by the roads that you access or the places that you visit? Yeah.
Well, I've been here very nearly 70 years and I live in Lost Passage and the Neck Point float, which is our community float, has a salt marsh behind it, about 2 or 3 acres. When I was growing up, I never, ever saw that flood in the summertime. In the last 12 to 15 years, I've seen that flood in the summer.
In the summer. How frequently?
Remember, there's a big tide and a loop around
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about, if there's a baseline in terms of sea level rise. I mean, it's been highly politicized, unfortunately now, and so
Yeah.
now we're getting as far away from science as we can. We're in the supernatural. But is there a good scientific baseline in terms of expectation of, low case, medium case, worst case scenario? Because, you go to places like Antarctica and the Ross Ice Shelf, just the Ross Ice Shelf, one item, 17 feet of sea level rise globally, 17 feet,
Yeah.
one item. Same thing with Greenland. So, is this sort of like a parabola that goes like this in terms of sea level rise? People around, were kind of dumb and happy and saying, well, it's been really slow, but maybe that slowness. So that's my question really.
Yeah, that is an excellent preview. I have several slides
Oh,
that are
great.
dedicated just for that.
Got it just right then.
Yeah, follow up if you've got questions as we go through that. Yeah, what are other changes? Yeah,
Well, I live in Indian Cove Road.
Yep.
And there are 13 houses along that cove.
Mhm.
And 2 years ago, during a king tide, when the barometric pressure was low and the winds were from the east, the water pushed in from Picnic Cove and came behind or in front of all of the houses. It came within this much of getting into our house, which is more than 200 feet back from the beach.
Yeah.
But it came in from the other cove, not from Indian Cove. And people's basements flooded, people's outbuildings flooded, and many people just had to get storage, get containers to put dump everything into it.
wow.
And people had trouble with vehicles that were in their garages getting flooded. And so we're quite concerned really to know what lies ahead.
Yeah.
And what we can do to help do something about it.
Yeah. And what year was that, or what years?
It was January 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was a rough
Yeah.
winter. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyone else, impacts, changes that you've seen? Yeah.
Well, I'm seeing more and more water get up like along the road, Blind Bay going towards the ferry. And then more of the storm debris getting pushed up onto the road. And then more inland flooding for sure than we've seen in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, in any areas in particular or along Blind Bay?
No, like, along Van Nevis, right near, Serendipity. And, over near going up to the Cedar Rock Preserve. Like,
Reef Net Bay.
Yeah. And then just along some of these coastal roads.
Mhm.
And then also out at the, Meg Point dock.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yes,
At the intersection where the library and the school are.
yeah,
There's some flooding there at times during heavy rain. There's a kind of a dam, I don't know, the beaver dam. There was a beaver there once. So kind of controlling that, just cutting grass and stuff. But, I think it's under control now.
Mhm.
But it came within 10 feet of flooding the library. Horizontally, about 6 inches vertically.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, lots of places. Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, well, we can talk more about some of that later. Okay, so I do want to just give a bit of an overview of sea level rise, coastal hazards. Some of you, this might be familiar if you have heard this before. Just want to make sure we're kind of all starting with the same background. And I have my phone here just to check on time, make sure that I'm not taking too long. Okay, so when we say sea level rise, what are we talking about? We're talking about the long-term increase in the average height of the ocean over time. So based on historic baselines. And sea level rise, the level of the sea, it kind of sets the baseline for flooding and erosion. So you think you've got the level of the sea, on top of that you have tides, you can have storm surge, which will push more water, and then you can have waves as well. And so as we see the long-term rise in the sea level, that pushes all of that up and allows for more water to reach higher and reach higher inland. So that's really why we care about that. And why is this happening? The simplest answer is because we're having increases in our global temperatures and have for a really long time. I really like this image. Each bar represents the average global temperature for that year. And it goes from 1850 to 2023. So you can see that the past several decades have been the warmest on average. And this here really just shows that kind of where we go in the future depends on how much emissions we have. So is it a lower emissions future where we just have a more moderate amount of warming? Or are there more greenhouse gas emissions where we're going to see even warmer temperatures? And this is important because the ocean is a powerhouse. It has absorbed a lot of our increase in temperature over that time. So all of the areas in warm colors there show places where the average ocean surface temperature has warmed. So the ocean is absorbing a lot of that heat. And this is important because when water gets warm, it takes up more space. So as the ocean gets warmer, it is physically taking up more space. And also all of that increase in air temperature means that the ice that we have in Antarctica, in Greenland, and our glaciers and ice caps, that also melts and brings water to the ocean. So raises that level. And we know that sea level rise is accelerating. So this is the slide for you here to answer that question. So the important thing here is that historically, this one on the left here shows the past 100 years. So this is from the tide gauge in Seattle, which has been there for 100 years. So I know there's one in Friday Harbor. It doesn't have quite the same length of record there. And so we see that there has been a straight line here of a gradual increase over time. So about 8 inches over the past 100 years. But we know that that is going to be accelerating in the future. And kind of those different options there represent those different emissions and those different future scenarios that we could have. So anywhere between about 1 foot and 8 feet, kind of depending on that, depending on the future for that.
You said 1 feet and 8 feet?
Yeah, by the year 2130.
That's a pretty big, right?
It is a pretty big range. Yeah, and that has to do with, just kind of differences in the amount of emissions and the likelihood. So what this bottom one here is kind of our for sure. We know with like 99% certainty with the models that we have that we'll see, a 1 foot of rise by that time. This middle one here is the 50%. So there's a 50% likelihood with our current models that we will meet or exceed that 3 feet. And then this one here is the 1%. So it's kind of like that more catastrophic situation of there's about a 1% chance by the 2030s with our current models that we would meet or exceed that amount of sea level rise.
Are you gonna tell us why we should look happily at the bottom line and feel comfortable? Or I'm gonna go out of this room screaming.
I mean, I won't be alive at that point, but that's really far out there. Yeah, so, you know, again, important because this sets the baseline for flooding and erosion. And it also allows, you know, high tides we're gonna see those more frequently as the height of the ocean is higher. So historically, we saw about 1.8 days of minor high tide flooding per year. By the 2050s, that could be closer to 6 days. And then by the 2100s, that could be closer to 120 days. So that nuisance flooding is gonna also be more frequent. Okay, excuse me, I thought I had some of these slides hidden, but I'm just gonna skip through the ones that are a little less relevant. So to your question here, kind of planning for uncertainty. So even though we're not, we kind of have many possible futures of how much change we're going to see, we are really certain that sea level is going to continue to rise for centuries. And the question is, when are we going to see that change? And that really depends on like how quickly is the global community going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and kind of also over time as we get closer, you know, our models and our science are going to get better and better. And so in the 2024 vulnerability assessment that Juan County did, kind of selected 2 scenarios here of planning for different possible futures. So one was 2 feet and one was 5 feet. And this is helpful because the 2 feet is more of our kind of middle of the century scenario, whereas the 5 feet is more longer term. And we can think about these being helpful because the 5 feet one, that longer term one could be helpful if a new building is going to be put in on the coast. If you want it to last for 100 years, it's important to know kind of what is that, you know, small chance, but very high risk should that flood. And you want to make sure that your investments are secure. Yeah. Whereas we can think of the 2 feet as being more of a kind of intermediate planning. And so what are the actual likelihoods for seeing these? So 2 feet, we've got about a 10% probability by the 2080s that we're going to see that amount or higher. And that increases over time. So by the 2100s, that's closer to 50%. And then that increases even more. And for 5 feet, highly unlikely that we would see that by the 2050s. But by the 2100s, that's about 1%. And as an engineer, when we're designing things, we're looking at that like 1%. What is that low risk, but very, very high consequence if that happened? Any questions? Yeah.
So this is for the static sea level
Yep.
rise. But if we have king tide, high winds, all of the conditions come together to increase the volume of water over the shoreline, over the roads. How do we have any estimates about how much higher that's gonna be? Because when we had the atmospheric river here, our roads were completely inundated and the culverts weren't sufficient to carry the water away. And so even though sea level was wherever it was, the reality on the ground was we were paddling to the ferry.
Yeah. You wanna?
Well, I mean, I think we should collaborate on the response, because I can just speak to the coastal flooding elements, that like the storm surge is gonna reach its maximum based on local conditions. Same thing with the tides, you know, we just have those king tides event, which elevate the tides to their maximum extent, but it's the sea level rise that really raises everything up. And so with fluvial flooding, is a different beast.
Yeah, so I mean, these are it's helpful to have kind of a number that is a threshold that you're planning for. So another way to think about this is, 2 feet of sea level rise, that's a 50% likelihood currently for the 2100s. But if we look at, 1 foot of sea level rise plus, king tide, storm surge, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my mind because it kind of depends location by location. Then that still might also be 2 feet. And so kind of that would change the timeline. You could see that sooner. So yeah, that's a good question. It is important to think about all of those together.
The pluvial flooding coming from these atmospheric rivers, which are definitely increasing in frequency and they're definitely high impact events on the coastline because they're contributing even more. I think that I don't have as much to say about the changes in the specific source of flooding.
Yeah, and the assessment that was done for the county, it does include what we call total water level. So that includes kind of all of those different things stacked on top of each other. And I can show later.
It still doesn't include
It doesn't,
pluvial.
right, it does
Yeah.
not include the rain
Yeah.
component of that, but the storm event and the waves. And there's a tool where you can actually look up for each location what that height of the water is. So I can show that later.
And within that, I can tell you that like the storm surge will max out at about 3 feet.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the king tides are similarly, and wave run up also adds about 3 feet, but that's not going to increase. That's just kind of like the upper limit of that range. It's the sea level rise that's kind of pushing the bar up on everything. And then the pluvial flooding, which is a change that there's different, there's recent research that's come out of the climate impacts group on at the University of Washington on, projections and changing kind of patterns with those, but there's a lot of uncertainty in those because it's so variable across the region where they're occurring. And I live up in Bellingham, and I think that we're similarly affected by large low pressure systems that are coming down from the Arctic via the Fraser Canyon, and that have really driven some big events.
So I was only, partially answered. Yeah, please.
I think maybe this is more for the county in thinking of overall resiliency and access inland because of atmospheric rivers, nothing to do with rising sea level.
Yeah.
But if there is going to be more impact from atmospheric rivers or other events that does affect inland, then how is the county preparing those roads like at the library or wherever to manage the water as it comes in?
Yeah. That's a great preview because, the flooding, it can be from the coast, but also from other sources. And my other hat, I'm a stormwater engineer, so I think a lot about like where rain is falling and how it's moving. And it's really important to try to reduce that risk kind of as close to where the rain is falling as possible to not then contribute to more flooding downstream where you have multiple sources coming together. Yeah, other questions right now? Oh, sorry, what?
Want to answer the question?
Oh, sorry, what was?
The question was, how are we preparing? So you do have a clean water utility. Lynn, sitting right next to you, used to serve on the oversight committee of that group. So your clean water utility is your stormwater, surface water management utility that our department manages. And so we are slowly but surely collecting revenue so that we can do projects to address problems. And so hopefully the situation over at the library has somewhat resolved itself because we worked to adjust so that the water would drain down through that culvert and stop backing up. But the beaver are very, tenacious and they'll probably get back in there, but.
No, there's no beaver, no beaver, not a beaver pond.
It's not beaver pond anymore, so that's great, but, when there are flooding issues and stuff, we are often the party that responds to that. And assesses the situation, and if there is quick fix, we'll do the quick fix. If there's a longer term, we can build that into a capital improvement program to deal with upgrading pipes or other things, but just know that it is super expensive to, put in the project, you know, the culvert that was just replaced over on Orcas Island. We had to make it fish passable, under, state law. That was, what are we at, 1.6 million?
Not quite,
Yeah.
not quite finished.
Not quite finished.
1.6 million.
So just to give you an idea of the scope and scale of what it takes to build the infrastructure in the islands, it's particularly challenging with all the logistics, as you all know, having built homes around here. So, we're doing the best we can, without, we don't want to charge too much. And so it's just kind of a slow and steady process, but we are keeping an eye on all of this and planning accordingly. The one other thing I would add is that particularly for sea level rise and being an island community, you know, the concern about saltwater intrusion and impacts to wells. Normally you would, push water off the landscape as quickly as you can because you don't want people to flood, but that is your drinking water. So we need to be thinking much more holistically and strategically about how to actually hang on to that water, not have it flood and be a problem, but also be able to hold on to what we can so that that's infiltrating and, you know, serving as your drinking water as it infiltrates into the groundwater.
Thank you for touching on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see different probabilities of sea level rise.
Yep.
You have an almost insatiable demand for capital improvement projects. I mean, you could go from, you know, $1 million to $1 billion just by snapping your fingers. So in terms of being a coastal community, what access does San Juan County have, perhaps together with other Saley Sea communities, but unlike people in Moses Lake or Spokane that probably don't give a rip what happens on the west side? So where do we source this amount of capital that's gonna be necessary? And then the second part of that is that how do we, if we don't have it, which I presume we don't, then how do you prioritize so that you make the best incremental use of $1 of investment? So you get the best payback and say, sorry, Charlie, you're out of luck because you're way out there, so forget it.
That is the $1 million question. I mean, yeah, so not every community in the state or across the country is dealing with coastal flooding and erosion, but they have wildfires, they have riverine flooding. And so demand on some of those, both state and federal resources for climate planning and preparedness is big. And we've seen, you know, changes currently in federal government funding for programs like FEMA that can help with both like, you know, pre-flood planning as well as kind of post-disaster recovery. So that is a, you know, shifting landscape. So there's both like the funding side, but I think there's also the community side, you know, like what is the community saying they want and what they need and working together to prioritize. Again, with limited resources, kind of, we can look at both the hazards and the timeline that we're likely to see those hazards and kind of come up with like a sequence strategy of, you know, maybe you need some time to raise money for a large project, but maybe there's other adaptation strategies that could be taken in the short term, like adjusting how something is used, moving a road to one lane, you know, thinking about other things to kind of sequence that timing. I think since that's a funding question, I'm gonna let you answer that one too.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. That's definitely the challenge. And there's not a lot of local money other than the small amount that we collect. I think, here we collect $90 a year from each household. As well as also from the outer islands, if we pull that. So you can imagine how long it would take us to build up enough resources for a larger project. So, we have been very fiscally conservative and just tried to patch together things as best we can. You know, but we are seeing, you know, things coming and, so it really is gonna take the communities, you know, driving and talking with council and encouraging them to invest or do things, that are critical, to managing our infrastructure. You know, they're also in a balancing act. So, yeah, we're just gonna have to keep working together. Some of the things that are gonna have to happen will need to happen as individuals. And then other things, like road infrastructure need to happen as more as a community. So, yeah, our point is that we're trying to keep you informed, let you know the limitations and the dynamics at play, and try to navigate those and come up with reasonable answers that don't break the bank. So that's where we're at.
But and where there's community support,
Yeah.
then there's more likely to be forward movement.
Right.
Like then you can get in line.
Yeah.
For funding the solution when there's community support.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so that things, can move to a new place.
Yeah, much easier to write a grant for a project when you're able to say the community wants this. Like, we have all, we've come together, we've decided that this is a priority. It's a lot easier to get funding for things like that.
You need landowner agreements to be able to apply for funding. So that's part of the journey.
Yeah,
With having these conversations
yeah,
is taking those fundamental steps to hear from the community and start to form leadership within the community to take forward steps.
yeah. Well, after the break, we'll have more time for discussion on that too, because that is the big question. Okay, I want to just keep this moving, so we're doing less talking. As you were talking about, flooding is not just from the coast, it's also from other places. So groundwater flooding, flooding from rainfall, flooding from rivers and streams. So where those overlap, there's more uncertainty and can also be more damage than one thing alone. Okay, I'm gonna pass to Andrew now just to talk a little bit about coastal erosion, and then we'll talk about adaptation strategies. What do we do about all this?
And some of this is pretty intuitive, considering that many of you live along the shoreline and are probably familiar with the basics of coastal erosion. Similar to there being compound flooding, areas where there's erosion and flooding are usually obviously central to our minds for where adaptation is needed. So I'm just going to hone in on the erosion part of it, and then we'll have more conversations about the adaptation piece. But with regard to sea level rise and climate change, coastal erosion is one of the main hazards that you see. You see it on every shoreline type. Less on bedrock shores, largely on our more glacially, the shorelines with more glacial geology and that are less consolidated. And you'll see recession of the shoreline, or if it's a high bank shoreline, maybe you'll see some shallow landslides or reinitiation of a deep-seated slide. Even on our barrier beaches or low elevation beaches, you'll see some movement of the shoreline gradually over time, but you see the most movement during high water events commonly, which we in the coastal geomorphology world refer to as change events. So the movement of the shoreline is just kind of a basic part of coastal geomorphology and the way that our shorelines work. The shorelines are in a dynamic equilibrium with the land, with the water. The water level is in this dynamic with the land. And one of the main driving forces of change are wind waves. So as winds, we are not exposed to ocean swell within this part of the Salish Sea. And so our winds are driving the development of small waves. Those waves can only get so large because our shoreline is so complex and crenulated. It's often described as what's called a fetch limited environment. So the waves can only get so big because the winds can only blow them so large. That makes sense. So when those waves approach the shore, they wash up the beach in one direction and drive down the beach at a 90-degree angle, and that results in the generation of this alongshore current that moves sediment in a specific direction over time. A direction of sediment transport is although it is largely associated with the origin of the wind or the direction that those waves are moving, over time, we have our dominant directions. And it's referred to as the net shore drift direction, and all of the shores of Washington have been delineated into these distinct sediment systems in which there's a dominant direction of drift. And over time, of geologic time, so hundreds to thousands of years, that results in landform development. And this picture here on the right kind of conveys that general concept at this landscape unit scale of the drift cell, where you have areas of erosion and a dominant direction of sediment transport. Kind of these areas here that are eroding bluffs are supplying sediment that's transported down drift and eventually feeding these depositional shorelines like spits, these lower elevation shorelines that gradually get larger and larger over the course of the years. Now, many of those shorelines have developed as a result of deposition. They may not be actively accreting or growing under current conditions due to various reasons. We'll talk about that more. So there's many different drivers of erosion specifically, and this graphic kind of depicts some of those drivers. Generally, we have three broad buckets for erosional drivers on the shoreline. There's wave-induced erosion, which you would probably guess is associated with waves. Then you have subaerial erosion, which is all the types of erosion that is driven by upland processes. So that's the groundwater, the geology of the slope, so the stratigraphy of the bluff. And many of our bluffs in the region are comprised of a mix of sandy material and clays. So where you have permeable material overlying clays, water percolates through the sand, collects above the clay, and that can lead to the formation of a slide plane forming. Particularly during heavy rains, you'll see slides occur, and that's because of the bluff stratigraphy. And we actually have a pretty well-documented precipitation threshold for when landslides occur on our bluffs. Not just coastal bluffs, but all bluffs because of that geology. And so those are some of the main issues or the main contributors to subaerial erosion. And then that third bucket of drivers of erosion are human-induced erosion. So that is erosion that's largely associated with how we're managing our stormwater and how, like, where we're causing saturated conditions or scour from the way that stormwater is conveyed, as well as where we've removed vegetation. So obviously, much of this region was originally covered with old growth forests that absorb, with each individual tree might have absorbed like thousands of gallons of water during our big precipitation events. So in the absence of all of those trees and just being replaced with lawn, we end up with much more saturated conditions that are conducive to soil failure. So any questions before we move on? It's kind of a lot in one slide. Okay, so as many of you are aware, did you have a question?
Yeah, leaking water. Is that what you mean by the,
Leaking water line, yeah, so that's
one.
that is associated with like a buried pipe where people may be capturing water, and instead of conveying it down to the slope, it's leaking water and causing saturated soils. So this I see all the time where people have, they're capturing stormwater on their property and conveying it into a plastic corrugated pipe. And unfortunately, those plastic corrugated pipes are really cheap, but they're photosensitive and they degrade and they get cracked, and then they end up leaking on the bluff or breaking free and causing a landslide. They're problematic. So that's just kind of a classic example that we see there. So as many of you are likely aware, our shorelines have risen and fallen many times over the course of geologic time. Our shorelines naturally adapt to those changes. And, but how they change, that natural geomorphic response differs based on the shore type. So along a rocky shoreline, it's easiest to see that there's just really a vertical change in the range of the tides or the range of the water level. And with sea level rise, that kind of upward shift results in a general shift or corresponding shift in the vegetation that you'll see, as well as like the invertebrate communities. And so there'll just be a minor shift vertically against that bedrock shoreline that's largely unchanging. Whereas on a coastal bluff, you'll see a landward shift in the whole beach profile. So from the crest of the bluff, all the way down to the beach, that whole beach profile will shift landward. So that the importance of this function is that we really do need the sediment input from the bluffs for the whole profile to respond, because this sediment that's coming from the bluff face is actually enabling the lower part of the beach to build up and not be, not be lost. So it is very important both for that whole profile adjustment, but also that sediment is transported downdrift and supports the adaptation of the downdrift shores as well. So when planning for sea level rise on coastal bluffs, you have to be cognizant of the fact that the bluff recession is going to continue in time, just like sea level rise is expected to continue over time. And one of the things when looking at those curves that Rachel was showing is that sea level rise is anticipated to accelerate. Well, unfortunately, that means that bluff recession rates will also be accelerating. So we have to plan for that. When we're thinking about realigning a road, we have to plan for not just the background erosion rate, we need to plan for it to, that bluff recession rate to accelerate as well. Because the bluff recession rates are really directly corresponding to the rates of sea level rise. So there's a very strong relationship there that has been well documented in the literature. The scientific.
I don't know why that happened. I didn't vote for it.
Get back on target. Okay, so back to shoreline translation. So on low elevation shorelines, similarly, that whole profile will shift upward and landward in response to the change in sea level or in water levels. Again, this happens largely during our high water events when the waves actually push up the coarser material onto the beach in a process called overwash. Sometimes when you see like when you're looking at like a spit or barrier beach, like over at Neck Point, you can see these like pebble fans landward of the driftwood. That's an overwash fan. That is, during that last high water event, that has kind of been deposited. Maybe the driftwood has been shifted a little bit further landward. That's the beach actually naturally adapting to that high water event. And it does that increasingly over time, and we end up with like shifting barriers, which is problematic if you have a road right there. But it's also kind of like, just an indicator of the dynamic nature of these shorelines. And it's really cool if you're into it. Maybe not if you're right on that. Okay, so along armored shores, those dynamic processes can't occur. They're impeded by the barrier or that static shoreline produced by the shoreline armor. And what happens is the shoreline kind of is butting up against the armor, and the whole profile is consumed essentially against that static barrier. So you end up losing the upper part of the beach first against that, right? As the uppermost intertidal or the back shore or that area where the driftwood would normally accumulate is now consumed by the shoreline armor. And then eventually, as the beach kind of continues to push further landward and is not able to naturally adjust, you start losing the upper intertidal or the uppermost extent of the intertidal. That forage fish spawning band is so important for our marine food web and so on. So, so this is just an important element that our shorelines are not able to adjust due to the armor, as well as impacting sediment input where they're along coastal bluffs, which is really the focus of this slide. So about 90% of the material found on our beaches is derived from coastal bluff erosion. So when we armor those bluffs, we're both decreasing the sediment input to the beaches, which affects all of the downdrift shores, as well as that individual beach. And this results in habitat loss and kind of the handicapped natural adaptive capacity of our beaches. So that we need sediment for the adaptive capacity to really be there for the habitats, as well as for our, you know, all of our beaches for recreation and so on.
You can skip that, yeah.
Okay, so do you want me to go forward here? Okay, so San Juan County did recently fund a sea level rise vulnerability assessment that consisted of lots of high resolution mapping across the county. It includes some deep dives into specific areas where there's a lot of risk to infrastructure. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. There is a great report, as well as a story map with a map viewer that is really informative and enables you to hone in on areas of interest to you and your people. This is a snippet of Blind Bay. So as you can recognize, you can see from the bottom right here, the different, the range of vulnerability that's depicted within the maps. So the different flood probabilities are demonstrated across this color gradient, as well as the different sea level rise projections. So here in the lightest blue, you'll see just a 1-year flood event with 2 feet of sea level rise. So you can see kind of starting up here by the ferry landing, you know, that little embayment just east of the ferry. I guess that's not really accessible, but you start to see more flooding adjacent to this pocket beach, which over time kind of increases. You can see this purple area here. That is the area that is anticipated to be inundated during a 100-year flood event with 5 feet of sea level rise. So that's kind of demonstrating that full extent of the flood hazard there. Now, the areas in pink are denoting where there's shoreline armor. So where there may be some different effects because of that shoreline armor. And then they also have mapped areas where there is anticipated to be erosion, such as along this, which is indicated by the green hatching here. So you can see areas that are going to be more vulnerable to erosion, as well as inundation, that with the erosion shown in green. And the impacts are pretty extensive, as you're all aware here, to both the stability of the road, its vulnerability to flooding, as well as like additional flooding associated with stormwater potentially, and ditches, as well as the habitats. And over time, some residential structures definitely docks and other kind of like marine facilities and some agricultural areas. Over here against, Smuggler's Cove Road, you can see more vulnerability within that shorter time period. So these areas in royal blue kind of jump out as areas that are going to be more immediately vulnerable. So, but just during a 100-year event.
Could I ask about a 100-year event? I mean, why do you say, I mean, I've seen seawater over that road.
Yeah.
It's not a 100-year event, it's just.
Oh,
Can I take that one? Okay,
Yeah.
we're close to a break also. So I skipped that slide earlier, but when we say a 100-year event, or we say a 100-year storm, what we mean is that there's a 1 out of 100 chance of that happening in any given year. So there's a 1% chance that we could see that in any given year, whereas a 1-year event, that's like 100% chance. We're going to see that, something of that size every year. So, and we also know that the baseline for that is changing. So what historically was considered a 1% chance in any year, we're gonna see those are getting bigger. And so you could have that 1% chance event last year, and you could have it this year, and you could have it the next year, because of just how probability works. Like, they make 100-sided dice, which I think is really cool. So you can also think about it, like if you roll that dice, your chance of rolling 100 is going to be the same each time. So we just use that as kind of a common way to think about planning, where it's that kind of that low probability but very high risk scenario.
Yeah.
And it's very confusing language.
Yes.
Because the probabilities are changing, yet that language is kind of staying the same. So that measure of that elevation of the 100-year storm, or that 100-year event is kind of a baseline that's used in this mapping effort, even though it's gonna be happening with greater and greater frequency. So,
Could I just follow up on that then? So,
Yeah.
I think everybody here is very concerned about whether that road is gonna be passable
right,
and over what percentage of the time during
right,
these storm events is that gonna be passable?
yeah.
And is there an amount of water on the road that is unpassable? Is it 6 inches, a foot, 2 feet? What makes it an impassable road? And then secondly, as you have increasing recurrence of these,
Yeah.
the stability of that roadway is getting lessened and lessened and lessened, so that its vulnerability to this. And then you had mentioned something that was near and dear to my heart, is you spend $1 today to fix something, it's $1 well spent. If you wait until it's wiped out, it's gonna cost you $1 million. Yeah, that's the way it is. So how do you invest in the future of things like the stability of that roadway? As an example.
Yeah, I think that it depends on the getting to your first question, when is a road no longer passable? I think it depends on the type of vehicle and, like how high it is, as well as, what the underlying material is under the road. If it's fill, it's gonna be much more likely to have that prison to be compromised over time and for there to be water flowing underneath.
Yeah, that's what that is.
When you start to see water flowing underneath the road's surface, it doesn't have a lot of time on that. If there is more bedrock supporting the road, then there may be more time. There's just a lot of uncertainty in this realm, and like a road engineer would probably be a better person to answer that question than a coastal geologist. So we can, I can reach out to some of my colleagues and get a better answer for you for that, for our next workshop.
We can, bring that up again in the second part, because we can talk more about that one.
Is there a website that we could go to see the whole island?
Yeah.
So that we can look
Oh,
at
yeah.
our own places?
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you look at San Juan County, sea level rise
there's,
vulnerability, it'll take you there.
The county has a cool engage page for all the various projects that we do, be it in our department or public works or various departments. And for our department and this particular project, that whole report is available for download. There's also a story map associated with it, which is kind of like an interactive version that allows you to explore a little more deeply.
Here, I'll pull it up right here.
Great, yeah, that'd be awesome.
So I think we're at time for a break. I want to respect that. So it's a little after 1. We'll reconvene in about 10 minutes and then we'll talk more about, okay, so what do we do about this? And continue some of those questions that you all had. But yes, this is, if you type in, you go to the county's website, if you just type in sea level rise, San Juan County, this webpage should show up. And then this will take you to a link to the story map, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then there's the map viewer.
Yeah, I'll pull the map up here if anyone wants to come look at that. Yeah, great. All right, so yeah, we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. There's apples and pears in the back. So check those.
I still have a lot of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. What am I doing sitting down?
Yeah.
My cable is not. Right.
That there is one way of
Okay, we're gonna get started again. All right, hope everyone got to stretch a little bit, quick snack. Get ready for just more discussions to come. So I'm gonna share just a little bit more about adaptation strategies and what we can do with, thinking about how to address flooding and erosion, but then want to save a lot of time for conversation. So bring your questions and we'll be discussing. So yeah, before the break, Andrea was just highlighting that Blind Bay had been part of that study. So there was a deeper dive on the flood risk and the erosion risk for that specifically. The study also highlighted Shaw Park Road. And so the blue colors and purple colors are showing areas with flood risk. And then the green is showing areas where there's more erosion risk. So I know it's hard to see, flooding over here along Reef Net Bay, and then also kind of out along the coast. And then same thing over here towards Picnic Cove, and then erosion along kind of each of those pocket beach areas. So for the next workshop, we'll hopefully have some bigger maps of this for folks to look at and see more detail. Another thing we wanted to mention, because we've shared a lot of some like doom and gloom about the changes that we're seeing and what's to come, and it's helpful to have an action. And one thing that you all can help with, are any of you familiar with the MyCoast app? Have you used it before? So this is a really awesome resource. So mycoast.org/WA. And this tool helps researchers and scientists understand changes in communities, like places that they can't be. So you can take pictures of king tides, you can take pictures of erosion, you can take pictures of storm surge, and the photo will be uploaded to the site with the location so that researchers are able to look at that and see what the conditions were like in different locations. So if you're out, if you want to help be a citizen scientist, take photos, you can do that, and that helps people, helps researchers understand the changes that we're seeing. Yeah.
You can also report debris that gets washed up on your beach and it can be picked up for removal using this app too. So it's like an old dock or an old boat or creosote debris that's like toxic and you want off your beach. You can report it using MyCoast and they will pick it up when they're in the area.
Yeah. So the photos on the right, there's a couple from Olga, that someone was just taking photos just the other day when I took that image. Okay, so I'm just gonna skip through here. We're gonna talk just a little bit about adaptation strategies. So what is adaptation? Basically taking action to reduce risk and increase resilience. Can be proactive, reactive, public, private, can be an infrastructure change or more of a like governance or community change. We have a lot of tools in the toolbox for that. We can think of them as kind of 4 different categories. So protecting, so that might be elevating a structure or putting armor in place. You're trying to protect something. Accommodate, which means you're kind of accepting the change. You know that the flooding is coming and you want to get structures out of the way or figure out ways to modify use. Retreating would also be like relocating structures or removing infrastructure. And then restoring would be trying to improve habitats, add beach nourishment, other strategies that kind of restore an area. Just going through a couple other tools in the toolbox quickly. So for homes, if flooding is a concern, you can flood-proof utilities, so raise them off the ground so that when water comes in, those utilities are not going to get wet. Elevating homes above flood levels, or relocating homes so they're out of that flood risk area. That's an example of what one looks like. So that house was raised pretty high off the ground. Also, if any of you have been to the East Coast and seen some of the houses on stilts there in beach areas, doesn't always look that extreme. Sometimes it's more of like a concrete foundation that's kind of just lifting up the structure. Relocating a home, so moving it back from a bluff. This example, I think, is from Orcas and was taken by someone friends with San Juan.
Yeah, Tina Whitman.
Tina Whitman, yep. So you can see the house that was really close to the bluff crest moved back. So buy some time with that. Can also look like, moving structures away from bluffs so they can, lift the structure up and move it back. Beach nourishment can also sometimes be a temporary strategy, so you're adding, gravel or sediment to the, you can speak better. I can, the geomorphology, but adding it to the beach profile.
There you go. You can use it in various ways to increase the resilience of a beach, both by like nourishing the whole beach profile, which is shown in that top one, or that top image, to just using it on the upper beach to provide some protection, kind of bring back that wave attenuating function of the storm berm, which may have been lost either during erosional events or due to the land use, changing land use, maybe getting rid of some lawn and bringing back that beach function. And then compensating for habitat loss sometimes, waterward of shoreline armor is another use.
So is a natural driftwood up against the bank, is that an armor?
Driftwood is not armor.
But it stays there all the time.
Yeah, sometimes driftwood can wash away during high water events, but typically, but it can add some resilience, like especially over like a beach berm like that. In fact, like a lot of our barrier beaches have buried wood within them. That the wood kind of is a natural component of our beaches.
Okay.
And provides additional structure and elevation.
Yeah. Just touching on shoreline armoring, sometimes that has a use. It can help slow erosion. It doesn't really help protect against flooding though, because if water goes over that, then you have water on both sides and then that kind of impacts the integrity of it. And it does not stop all erosion and it requires adjustments over time and comes with the trade-offs of losing habitat, important habitat. Removing armor and restoring areas, like it's shown here on Orcas, can also be another adaptation strategy. So all of the riprap and rocks were removed there, and then the beach area was restored there. So like Andrea was talking about, allows the beach to adapt over time and build up. And I think this has been in place for close to 20 years, you said, and still.
Oh yeah, maybe more. I think it was built in the 80s.
Yeah.
It was designed by Wolf Bauer, who some of you may have heard his name before. I think he was living in Anacortes when he passed away at like 102 or something like that. He designed and implemented a lot of these beach nourishment sites around the region.
Okay, so just going to talk a little bit about some other ones. So septic systems, one strategy, if there's an area with a lot of septic systems that are impacted, is looking to create a community septic system. So neighbors working together to find a piece of land where it's not going to get flooded and looking to kind of manage that infrastructure in a shared way, which could be less expensive than everyone going it alone. Or looking at, if it's an area where it floods frequently, looking at moving to a holding tank or something else so you don't have that contaminated water going into the environment. And then for roads and utilities, also some tools in the toolbox. So you could elevate a road and armor it. That picture there on the top is from the Netherlands where they have huge waves. And so a lot of fill was put in there to elevate that road, lift it up really high and kind of armor the sides of it to protect it. Other strategies include removing roads or realigning them, putting them in a new location where it's not going to be at risk. And another strategy is also adjusting road use. So maybe going down to a one-lane road because that buys you some more time in an area, or looking to extend it a little bit, or a road that's open seasonally, or there's times where it's closed. And then here's just a couple examples from the San Juans of roads that were removed or realigned. So Montgomery Lane on Orcas, your Harbor Road on Orcas, and then Cattle Point Road on San Juan Island. All right. So now the more fun part of discussion. So I was curious just to get some reactions from you all. Yeah, any questions about the adaptation strategies or things that are on your mind after the break and after talking through about different challenges and opportunities. Yeah.
What are some ways that you can protect these coastal roads? Like, specifically from, going into the ocean in the near future?
Ways to protect them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard, a hard question. So, I mean, options, you know, you could try armor in places. You could, you know, try to build up the base of the road more. Those are gonna have a limited time because as the water gets higher, they're gonna be compromised. And those can also be really expensive and come with trade-offs to habitat. You lose habitat in places. I mean, other ways to protect it, yeah, like making sure that there's not erosion, stormwater in places. We didn't really see that as we were driving today, but that can be a challenge.
And an increasing challenge as kind of water can collect behind structures, like if you were to armor that, eastern portion of Line Bay, then you would have to manage for the wet soil adjacent to it. So the drainage would also need to be required.
Yeah, I'm not prescribing anything, just kind of brainstorming different ideas. I mean, could also look to switch to one lane in a location and really try to, you know, revegetate areas to help get, you know, the roots to hold things in place and buy a little bit more time there to, you know, the erosion will continue, but just try to have, you know, kind of protect what you've got, have a little bit more time with that. Yeah.
You mentioned a few moments ago, I think you had done a mapping of the entire county. And is that available and can we see in terms of vulnerability? I mean, are there red areas and pink areas, blue areas and so forth that, where my question is going is that how do you identify a real problem and get it up on the scoreboard so people begin to pay attention to it? Is there a mechanism of doing it? Or did this mapping thing do that for you guys so that you have a pretty good clue about what the big risks are in the county?
Yeah, so we did not do that mapping. That was a different group that did that. So so the two maps that we showed for Shaw were two of the areas where they did like a deeper dive. So they mapped those areas more closely. But there is also mapping countywide that shows the water levels. So I can share the screen after. There is a page through the county's website. If you type in sea level rise and Juan County, that should pop up and you'll be able to see the map and look across the islands for that. The part about prioritizing though, I mean, that comes down to really conversations among community members and with the county, you know, with limited resources, what are the ones that are most important? Like, you know, what is going to be impacted first? What is going to have the greatest impact when it is? And
Is that happening?
Is that happening?
Happening, yeah.
I might ask.
I mean, if somebody translated that, all the good mapping work is
Yeah.
done, that's great. Identify where the risks are, that's
Yeah.
great.
Mhm.
Understand what the physical resource limitations are, that's great. Now, who sits down and makes the hard decision? You talk about the community doing it, but I think everybody has interest, first of all, their own interests first, right? And other people's interests, I mean, San Juan County, Lopez, Orcas, you know, Shaw, now that's important, right?
Yeah. Well, and yeah, the mapping for every island did show sections of road that are facing these impacts. So we're going and talking to all of the islands and hearing people's concerns and hearing what spots are very impacted. But I mean, a lot of it is, you know, community coming together and saying, this is a priority, this is important to us. We, you know, this is the change we want to see.
Well, and I would just add, at least in the case of roads, of course, you have the transportation improvement plan. And
Right.
that's, that contains both, what I'll call triage projects, where there's an imminent risk that it has to move itself up because of what's going on. And then longer term known problems. And so the county has that list and they work through it and some things move up on the list, as they become more critical. You know, as we've mentioned repeatedly, you know, the challenges of funding are always there. We try to go after grants and other things, but a lot of those are drying up, at the state and federal level. So figuring out, what we can get by with, shall we say, the imperfect, don't let the imperfect be the enemy of the good, is kind of the approach we're moving into. So really thinking about, and when we do the exercise, you know, workshop, thinking about, you know, the cost per mile. I mean, just as an example, for a bike lane, on a road on either side in the county, you know, for a road that doesn't have good shoulders, it's $3 million a mile. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, more money to actually physically move the road, or do a culvert and that sort of thing. So it really is, largely response driven to safety. And that seems to be like for transportation, obviously that's a super important aspect of the decision-making around sites. And then we have these other things that if we are able to get grant money from various local things, then that can move a project up because there's money available and we want it. So I know that's an imperfect answer to this. And then for the clean water utility, we have a broader drainage master plan, and we're gonna be doing some upgrades and updates through a conversation about integrated water resources, and that will help further frame our conversation about, you know, which drainage problems are the worst and how are we gonna go about trying to help manage them kind of on a community scale. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah.
And so, Kendra, the last time I noticed the budget for the clean water utility for that so-called outer islands or in Shaw was like $15,000 a year. Yeah. That's what I can tell you. I actually have a budget right now. If you really want to know, I have the budget worksheet open. I'm just very old. So for Shaw and other outer islands, so you get charged $30 a year in capital funding, for projects. So you've currently accumulated, you know, we're just doing pretty much very small projects dealing with nuisance flooding at the moment, but you currently have a ending cash balance, for 2026 of $168,000. That buys you maybe a small culvert, just to give you an idea. So if you want to come forward and encourage us to, you know, increase that, we've been very conscientious about not elevating rates and charges and trying to get by. I do think some of these conversations beg the question of whether or not we need to be investing and saving more to deal with these bigger challenges, especially now that we know that they're probably, at least for the next 4 or 5 years, are going to be really limited on revenue coming in from the state OPEBs.
So are you telling me you're wasting my $30? And we have $1 billion of needs.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe we could increase the 30.
Yeah, we could, and yes, you know, so.
Sign up for that.
Yeah, if there's an interest in doing that, and there is also nothing that stops you if this community wants to form a local improvement district, you know, we'll happily work with you and get that set up. And what that is you basically agree to tax yourself to be able to do something.
Right.
And we can work with you to develop that because you decided you want to go and do this project, and we'll work with you to create that. Just as an overarching strategy for the county, we're trying to really keep a cap on those budgets and revenue asks. So, but we're happy to work with you if the community feels like you know, they would like that to happen.
I was just curious, what is the county's ability to respond to these, emergency events where, you know, you have a road washout?
Yeah.
Where does that capital come from?
How have we responded in the past?
Yeah.
So, you know, we have, Public Works, available, to us to put forth a response. Typically, the last couple of, you know, really large storms in 2020, 2021, there were emergency declarations and, that enabled us to solve for the initial repair. And then, like, our department actually built the Cormorant culvert replacement and the Bayhead replacement. So those two projects, we furthered on, got the proper design that is required by state law, and then built those projects, and FEMA paid those bills. So hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers, everybody knock on wood, because we've submitted our FEMA bill for $1.15 million.
2 days before
2
the
days
government
ago.
shut down.
Because it just got built. It got built last week. So we are where we are, and we may end up eating that. We don't know. So, you know, we have the capacity in our fund on Orcus to handle that, but this is just an example of, like, if there is no backstop from the state or the feds, I'm not really sure how that's all gonna work out. You know, we'll piece it together. I mean, obviously, that's our job, is to keep people safe and respond to these, but it's gonna be imperfect.
But what you're saying with $126,000 in balance, which is, you know, nothing.
168.
So realistically, the only way to move forward in terms of reasonable development for sea level rise is a LID, a local improvement district.
Yeah, if you wanted to do one specific on this island to advance it more rapidly than what might occur otherwise, that is probably the most expedient, strategy to go. And again, the tricky thing, and we'll get into this in, you know, the workshop too as well, is that there's no place on public land that road can go. So, other than where it is. So it's gonna take the community and the property owners along that road to decide that they want to allow it to be moved, you know, I don't know, 20, 30 feet inland or whatever the number is. I don't even know what the number might be. But those are the conversations you have to have amongst yourself, because the county has not been in a comfortable position of pursuing condemnation. That is not something we've seen the counselors interested in doing. So it really will take a voluntary effort of the community to say, yes, we want this. We'll sort out how to compensate people that have changes in their dynamics on their property. And they're going to press forward because we all want to get to the fair.
So what I'd like to know is what our realistic options are from an engineering point of view. If we increase the culvert size, that seems to me that might buy us some time.
Little
Maybe.
A little bit, because it's going up.
If it may be possible to strengthen the underpinnings of it because it's washing out underneath. I don't know what's involved in that, but having that as an option. Or raising it up, you know, as you mentioned, let's put it on stilts or something, I don't know. So I think what we need as a community is to know what our realistic options are for that and roughly what they would cost.
Yeah.
So people can make some kind of then we can start talking among ourselves to see what we want to see there, because otherwise we're going to wait till it collapses and we're not going to be able to get them prepared. And yeah, FEMA may come through and help us in an emergency, but that's no way to plan.
Right.
And a bit of what we get into in workshop two as well. So Herrera's worked on some of these kind of alternative scenarios for some of the case studies. The case study obviously here is Blind Bay. On Salmon Island, it's False Bay. On Orcas, it's West Sound. and Lopez, it's Stanford Stanley, and to look at those roads and really apply what we know about what we think the future holds, and look at it through three different lenses. One of which is just kind of that baseline of like, we just did nothing, let the future unfold as is, what would happen? How does it affect that road? How does it affect that community? The next option is throwing everything we got at it to protect it through armoring and whatever. What does that look like? These kind of extreme scenarios. How much roughly would that cost to do? And then abandoning the road, which in a case like this, you can't just abandon it because it's a lifeline. So it has to go somewhere else. Where can it go? And what does that look like? And how much might that cost? And again, there are these barriers that Kendra mentioned, like you don't have an option to put this road anywhere else other than on private property. So that requires this community to come together and have some hard discussions about who's going to work together to allow that road to be moved. Just off the top of my head, it can come inland a little bit from where it is, or maybe there's somewhere much farther inland that's not even on the shore. I don't know. That's a bigger discussion to be had probably at the next workshop.
So let's say the community comes together and says, this is what we would like to see happen. How does it then get prioritized for the county to work on that? It is the top priority over other things.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. The prioritization, I think, is something that gets worked on an annual basis with our capital improvement plan from our department. There's the transportation improvement plan from the Public Works Department. This would probably be something that would involve both departments. The funding for it is obviously a huge question, like we were just discussing. There's, I don't think, ever going to be a large enough clean water utility fee to pay for a project like that. So there's gonna have to be funding externally somewhere. And as Kendra mentioned, a lot of that funding is drying up. There's two things going on there. It's drying up, but it's also getting more competitive. And we're kind of small beans compared to a lot of the other bigger counties out there that are also experiencing these issues. So we have to figure out ways to be competitive for that funding as it's getting smaller. And one of the ways that we can is coming forth with a community that is like unified on what they want to do, because that makes a project much more likely to be successful. So that's why we're having these conversations now, because the runways are long to get to the point we want to get to. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that's going to happen in a few years. Like these are decade-long types of conversations, and then the actions that need to succeed those conversations. So hopefully that's what we're starting now.
Right, like, so even if the impacts are not gonna be really extreme in the next few years, building a new road or something, anything like that takes time, it takes planning and things related to that. So it's important to start the conversation now and start, because then you have time to actually do that.
Yeah, and Flying Fly was really thinking, you said, and that's our lifeline. That's going to the ferry, and every single company has to do that. It's not just one road going past Coles Bay or somewhere, it's a road everybody needs to take to get off this island.
Yeah.
And it would be nice if that wouldn't wait till it sinks. They would handle something before that.
Yeah, right, which may help build some consensus because every single person here depends on that road. Yeah.
It's very difficult to think about those things, and we talk about it all day long if you don't have an idea of what the cost associated with this is. Isn't there like, aren't there benchmarks with maybe other counties where there were similar projects before the landslide? I mean, you hear it all the time, and then all of a sudden you go back 2 years later and the beautiful road has been going across and everything looks like, rock solid, literally. Would there be benchmarks where we would know how much something like that costs of a very similar project, and then, have some idea of what we're into?
Yeah, I mean, we can provide that, and the next workshop, we'll have the Public Works Director here, and can share, I think the Baylor Hill Road, if I'm not mistaken, was 6.8 million.
Sounds about right.
And that is probably about an equivalent length to what you're dealing with here. So
Okay.
6.8 million
Yeah, okay.
to basically take out some bumps and add a new culvert and resurface the road there. They elevated it in some areas where there was flooding over the road. This will be a little bit more tricky because you're so tight up against that shoreline in a couple of key places, and they were able to do that in existing right of way. The real runway that we have runway challenge here is getting all the property owners to agree as to an allowance if you're gonna scooch it over or you're gonna go up a different route. Like, everyone's gonna have to agree to that and think about a compensation strategy depending on level of impact of property owners. So those are the harder conversations. If that could get worked out and you have kind of a turnkey ready plan, it moves up the list, and especially if there's some local funding support for that, it helps it move up the list quicker. That's for sure, because it's ripening faster. The hard projects, and we were just on Lopez yesterday, the McKay Harbor Road, that situation, it's 20 years of discussion, and, the planning engineer that worked on that previously, Shannon Wilbur, who is retired now from Public Works, commented that she was so impressed that, because when she first started having the conversation, everyone denied that sea level rise was happening. So the turn in the conversation of what are we gonna do about it is significant. And that is finally starting to happen now. Everybody kind of recognizes we need to plan ahead for this, and work together to sort it out.
This just brings me to another question, the permitting process, what's that like today? Because shoreline work usually involves several agencies, and sometimes those agencies don't even agree with each other.
Yeah.
And it can take a long time and it can expense. So what's the situation when it's a public works?
Yeah, it's not pretty. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. I mean, from the federal agencies to the state, to even our own, local land use, we have to get the permits for each and every one of those. It becomes a heck of a lot easier if we're pulling off the shoreline.
Yep.
If we're on the shoreline, it's an uphill battle. So, if there's opportunity to pull off that shoreline, and make so that there's a nice walking trail or something along that road, the current road now, and you're scooched over, so traffic can still get by, maybe there could be multiple wins in looking at, those sorts of options. So lots of things for the community to think about. We're not claiming we have any of the answers, because it's entirely really up to all of you.
The taking of the shoreline makes it much more difficult to permit. So if you're taking, if you're filling intertidal areas.
Yeah.
So that area along the east side of the shoreline is likely at or right in line with the highest observed shoreline or the highest estuarine. So like it would be within
Tide.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's like within, it's likely right in line with the core jurisdiction. So,
And the sea wants more land, as these two have just presented to you. It wants to come inland. So, trying to hold back the sea, is a tricky proposition. It certainly has been done for some countries that have been facing this for years. You go to the Netherlands or Iceland or some other places, they've made that happen. But in today's environment, with the cost of things, those are not things that are gonna happen in this tiny community. So, what is our next best, option? So move the needle and make sure you all get to the fair.
Let's move the ferry.
Yeah.
Going back to the little problem we have down, on Indian Cove Road. Is there somebody who could come down and talk with us and make suggestions about things? Many years ago, somebody came down and made some suggestions as to what we might do, and most of us picked up on those. And, I just wonder if we could get an estimate of the enormity of it, or what would be the best thing if we were to individually try to work on our properties?
Are you seeing, solid water intrusion in your wells or impacts to your septic systems? Is that-
No, no, we're not Christian, but some people are. There are 13 houses along there.
Yeah, I mean, we can set something up and bring the health department with us and just have a conversation about what you're experiencing and, what your options might be.
I'd be happy to get the people together, so that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Start your
going-
name on the sheet.
Okay.
Indian Cove Road, and then I will
Okay.
remember to get in touch with you.
Yeah, it's not just like with roads, but also when a series of houses are able to go together and think about strategies, there can be more that you can do and it can be more cost effective.
Well, I have a question following up on Lily's. If you just fix the existing Blind Bay Road, that's gotta be the cheapest option. But if your delta is only 5 years and you're underwater again, then the next time it's gonna be 5 years, and the next time it's gonna be 2 years. So now, how do you triangulate in terms of $1 million it takes to fix this for 5 years versus 10 or $20 million to fix it for 20 years or 50 years?
Yeah.
Or a permanent, nothing is permanent, but a more permanent fix. Because I think the temptation is gonna be to do it as cheap and quickly and efficiently as possible. But it's not necessarily the wise financial investment for a community, I don't think. What do you think, William?
And there's,
I think 5 years is way too short, it would have to be, you would have to be, at least, I think, so.
Yeah.
It's like this, those things where you just have to do it right the first time, otherwise it's just gonna keep,
Yeah. Can you do it right the first time where that road is stuck right now?
Innovative.
It depends on the definition of right.
Yeah.
and what do you mean by elevate? Do you mean just filling it and raising it? Or do you mean putting in a bridge? If the bridges get very, very expensive and stilts, yeah. I think that there's something to be said for multi-benefit solutions too, that if realigning the road outside the shoreline means that you can restore habitats and have amenities for the community, like, beaches that people can walk along, or footpaths or biking paths that are accessible to the community that doesn't live on the shoreline, that can also add value to the community. But I think that there's also the element of, the long-lasting solution combined with habitat restoration. It does open up, other funding mechanisms.
So it's tricky though, because I think along Blind Bay, most of that shoreline is not accessible to the public anyways. So
Or the
then
private
at that point, maybe you can sell it as if you move the road inland, then those property owners now have, an unobstructed waterfront property, and that would increase their property value, but like, it's tricky.
But wouldn't the right of way still exist for like a footpath or a bike path?
Yeah, but we won't abandon any right of ways.
No.
So the right of way will always.
But that doesn't grant you access to the shore.
Right.
Right.
Owns the tidelands to go.
It's all private as far as I understand.
Yep. Okay, Martha?
It goes way back to the 18.
No, my question is who?
Whoever has the parcel.
It's multiple parcel owners.
Yeah.
All the way around.
Yeah, with all of this, I mean, it can be, yeah, it can be helpful sometimes to think about like, what if we got it right? Like, what would be the best case version? What would a very, kind of, great, as Andrew was saying, like multiple benefits? What if there was more access? What if there were, places for people to walk along the coast? Also to think about how could you design a solution that also gets that?
One quick thing I'll add, just from our online audience, maybe you know Tina Whitman, she's been online, she's from Friends of the San Juan. She just wanted to offer that landowners for your private land, if you want to look into what can be done on your shoreline, that Friends of the San Juans manages the shore friendly technical assistance program. And so if you want to get in touch with Friends of the San Juans, they'll send somebody out for free to assess your shoreline and see what might be able to be done there in terms of natural, using more natural technical approaches to protecting your shoreline.
That's the program that Korean used to
And helping remove armor as well. If you're interested in removing armor and replacing it with something that's more habitat friendly.
If I would have designed the blind by road, what I would do, I would basically use a technique like you build a pier. You have pilings and then you put a deck on top of it, and underneath it's all hollow. So that would actually do both things. You basically protect, the shoreline. There's only pilings there, and then you have a deck, where, we drive on. So that's what I would do.
That's one strategy, yeah. Yeah, lots of every strategy has different trade-offs with costs and feasibility and what do you gain and what do you lose with that. Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at the time and we're almost done for today. But I did want to just kind of as we wrap up here, some takeaways. You all know change is happening and this is the start of a conversation, and planning ahead is really community responsibility. We can also learn from other communities on other islands and around the Salish Sea and from other parts of the world, and acting early can have a lot of benefits as well. So I guess, yeah, anything that you all would really want to discuss next time when we come back for workshop 2. Anything you'd like to hear more about, things you'd want to talk about?
The 2 sites,
Yeah.
are there any others? We'll talk about those too.
Yeah, okay.
Hopefully with trace paper and pens, so we can have fun drawing things.
Yeah, and so, yeah, for the second workshop, we'll be back. We'll talk more about adaptation planning and we'll focus on some specific examples. And that will be scheduled for probably later October, but the date forthcoming. Yeah, any other questions or things that you've been thinking about as we wrap up?
Well, I think one of the takeaways is like, you guys are experts in your field, and it would be nice if you could give us like even scale ideas of like, this solution could run in this, this scale of price tag, and this solution could be in this, and this is, this is out of your reach.
Yeah.
Just so that like, we even have an idea of like, what is feasible for our community.
Yeah, cost and benefits.
Yep.
Cost benefits, we can do that.
Some of that
Yep.
in the report.
The more people that you guys can invite to participate,
Yes.
the more that you can kind of build that community support or just branch out, bring in, any of the people who are within the right of way, anyone who could be a barrier to, having to forward action, bringing them into the conversation earlier rather than later can help.
Yeah, I think especially with the Blind Bay issue, if you can give us a list of options, so we all have something to talk about.
So we can all discuss, you know, what we like about one and don't like about the other. So we've got some choices to make with a rough idea of the timeline and the cost. Because that people engage, okay, there's a decision we have to make here, and we do have to because the road's going to fail. So what are the choices we have? We can start that community conversation if we've got something to talk about, other than just abstract ideas.
Well, the options are,
We kind of generally have three options for
Yeah.
blind bay. I'm gonna oversimplify. One is we do nothing, which is not really doing nothing. It's saying we're gonna wait, we're gonna see what happens, we're gonna react, maybe we'll do some repairs. We're gonna accept that there's, gonna be damage, and at some point the road won't be usable. And that's the scenario. Second option would be, we try to protect it. We, look at building it higher, we put in fill, we armor it. But at the cost of losing habitats and other things, and that has a limited time frame at which that would work. And then the other option would be to relocate parts of the road, to come up with other ways to use the road, to try to find a longer term solution, but it's not gonna be effective. Is that a fair?
yeah, and I think that the relocating of the road, there are different scenarios
Yeah.
there, but it's all dependent on landowners and gaining consent and support for a road realignment.
Are those scenarios that you guys have done already, or?
Yeah.
We have evaluated them, but without the and doing any engagement with landowners. This is our first effort in that, so presenting things without landowner consent, it's offensive to many people, so.
But in other words, so you have, considered possible geographic placement where a road might land on that island.
Yeah,
Okay, that would be very helpful.
yeah.
Because just offhand, oh, gee, where would we put a road? So yes, getting that information of what actual geographic lines are being discussed would be very helpful.
Yeah, that can be a part of the conversation for the next workshop. I'm thinking about some of the benefits and the trade-offs for each of those different scenarios.
It might be helpful to know what that route is beforehand, so that those particular landowners that they want to come participate, they will know about it.
I think there's many possible routes. You could
Maybe all
think
of
of
them would be.
everything from like sliding the road over to kind of forming a new path. So there are many kind of possible options for that. Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty much any landowner in that whole area could potentially be impacted.
Potentially.
There's more information about the idea that, I don't remember what you called it, but this reducing it to one lane. What was the term for that?
Just, kind of adjusting of the road. What was the term?
Edge lane road?
An edge lane.
Edge lane road, yeah.
So more information about what that would entail would be useful. That's a new concept.
Remember stoplights.
Yeah. Right, and there could be kind of like interim steps as well. It could take a long time to raise money for a capital project, and so there might be kind of interim steps as well, and that is one option that could be kind of the intermediate one. Yeah.